and first I want to thank the 4 poets who agreed to participate today. I'm going to set this up similar to what a song circle would be. I think most people know what that is. So it'll be a poet circle instead of a song circle. I'm going to introduce each poet before their first poem. And then in between each reading, I'm going to ask a question about the poem we just heard before we move to the next poet. Before we start, I just want to say that the writing and reading of poetry is personal. What I hear or feel in a poem will likely be different than what you hear or feel, or what the writer intended at all, because we each bring our own experience to the words. There is no wrong interpretation. There are only the words these poets freed from their sentences and dictionaries so they could flutter around our consciousness and elicit our responses. After the poems, I will ask the poets questions about their writing or publishing processes as we have time. I'm going to start with Elizabeth Kirkpatrick Verenios. Verena, how do you say your last name?
Verenios.
Verenios. Elizabeth Kirkpatrick Verenios.
Yes, like friendly, only with a V.
Okay. Elizabeth is professor emerita from American University in Washington, D.C., where she chaired the vocal and music departments. She traveled the world as a soloist and is now the artistic director of the Redwoods Opera. Her writing is featured in Tupelo Press's 30/30 Challenge and in a list of journals and anthologies too long to list. She has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize twice, which is pretty amazing. Her first chapbook, Special Delivery, was published with Yellow Chair Press in 2016. Her second, Empty the Ocean with a Thimble, was released in April of 2021 by World Tech Communications. Her first poem today is titled Gifts from My Son. Elizabeth?
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. Thank you. This is called Gifts from My Son. He gave me ravens who brought me flowers shaped like skateboards, fat and slick ripe, who splintered sunlight, who crushed borders, who imagined themselves wolves, who doubted their wingspan, who flew anyway. He gave me ravens who rode from Schenectady to Syracuse in a glass coach, who spoke all languages, who spoke none at all, who carried light in a bucket full of holes, who said they weren't afraid of 1 in 20, who lied, who gave me London with secrets still in doorways, who gave me the leap of a red squirrel, who played guitars on star-crossed corners, who locked broken doors, who opened broken prayers. He gives me a raven whose voice cracks the river rocks, whose voice strays like a homemade kite loosed from his tethers, whose voice I still stalk in the fog, whose voice wounds heaven with a single cry, whose voice is like the moment a star closes its light. He is the raven who falls from trains, who falls from a trillion skeletal trees, who falls from flames and ashes. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So this poem to me feels like the pages of a life. Is that what you were trying to get across?
Actually, yes. This was written for the son who was on the Pan Am flight that crashed quite a few years ago. And a lot of the lines in the poem indeed kind of referred to that. He lived to be 20, but he never lived to be 21. So the line that says, who said they weren't afraid of 1 in 20, but who lied, was kind of a subtle reference. He was an exchange student in London. And so that's why the line, who gave me London with secrets still in doorways. He rode his skateboard all the time. That's why the skateboard is in there. And there's one reference to his writing, because he wrote some things. As a child, he wrote in he wrote all the time. And one of the words he used, phrases he used, he said, he climbed 1 trillion trees that day. And boy, was he sore at the end. And so I had trillion trees in the poem because I love that line.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm sorry for your loss, of course. And
Oh, it's
beautiful way.
many years. It has been many years.
It's a beautiful way to put it on paper. Thank you. So next we have Nadi Bumpo. Nadi is a writer, artist, and poet. He's published in the MF, I don't know to say this correctly, Amaflork Sauce Factory, Words Without Walls, Poesis, Telling Our Stories Press, the Peacock Journal, the Calabash Cadence, Word Fountain, Poetry South Extreme, and the Anthology for Social and Environmental Justice by Vagabond Press. He also has a novella, Tyrian Dreams. It's available on Kindle. Nadi's first poem is Days at the Beach, which he wrote in 2019.
Nadi, you're muted.
Here we go. Sitting with our legs floating in the air, the rocks below awash in time. How many tides have taken us in, out, beyond the breakers? Stirring memories of oceanic doubts and conquests. There is no silence like this steady pulse. Susurrations against sand and the great cloak you always wore. Leaning against my stubborn love, we have become like our dogs. Delighting on the driftwood beaches, enough grains to fill the coffers of Agamemnon. Tenfold, build us new monasteries of night where the light slows down until it weeps. I did not know what to ask of the world back in the shadows of my youth. Even after finding you, years had to pass, my confusions only slowly lifting. I could not see the differences between what I imagined and what was only just becoming. Today, the dogs are not as quick, age working its slow solidification on the body, but the ocean still fills spirits to the brim, and we all run as fast in our hearts as we did in our earliest dawns. This is how we come to know our true worth. The ground beneath us, the sky above, hearts open, endless wonders.
Thank you, Nadi. And I had to look up susurrations to find out what it meant. So it was a good opportunity for me to check out my dictionary. So this poem, it has this embedded comfort in it. It feels like warm slippers and blankets on a winter evening. You wrote this in 2019, which we refer to as the before times. I see the days at the beach as a metaphor for the wisdom and self-awareness we all hope to gain as we age. But have your days at the beach helped you process the tumultuous periods we are sharing?
Well, I don't know. I don't think I ever stopped processing anything, really. I think it's part of that process. I think there's something about finding those moments where we can recreate or rediscover wonder in our lives. It's kind of a balm, I would assume. And especially in the world we live in now, where there's so much utter insanity going on, we need all the balms we can find. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That, and I've always wanted to use the line, we have become like our dogs. So
does anybody else know what susurrations means? It means murmurs. It murmurs against the sand, which is such a lovely word. I just absolutely love it. So our next poet is Jonathan Pazer. Jonathan is a published poet, artist, and photographer. He practiced law in New York City prior to turning to his creative side in 2011, sorry. He moved to California, became a member of the Mendocino Arts Center in 2018. He self-published a photography poetry chapbook called 7 Dimensions of the Unseen in 2016. His work is available at the Mendocino Coast Photographers Gallery in Fort Bragg. John's first poem is The Other Side. It was part of an ekphrasis exhibit in New York in 2018. John?
Oh, thank you. And for the record, I go by Jonathan, but that's great.
Jonathan,
No worries. The Other Side. I walked out of the door in anger and followed the black water into the night. I can't always bear to be myself, and I'd rather broadcast my dark mood to the murk than to spill it out all across the barman's counter. How are you of any use to the world, any more than the rest of them warming a stool in there? On my path on this night, I feel as though I cast no shadow, and there is nothing to mark my passage, nor deflect my course. Who, I chide myself, is not discontented by their own impotence before the million sorrows that beset us in every moment? The inside of my head rings with the rebuke of my own indictments. Beside me, the black water rustles and burbles, a soft counterpoint to my internal torrent. How can I justify myself to myself? To know I cannot do enough, how can I live with that certain knowledge of my ultimate failure? Not far ahead, the sound of water falling on stones, not a cataract or even a tumult, but more a churlish splish splash just beyond my view. The black water I'd been following makes a modest ruckus now, where it rushes over the edge, and even by the faintest wisp of moon from the sliver overhead, the water shines silver and precious as it leaps and splashes down into this lively pool. Sparkling briefly, the water froths and foams, then its beauty spent, it resumes its ignominious course downstream, while behind and above, just enough rain and snow gathered from all the hills and all the leaves of the trees, from all the dewy morning clover gushes after, to make one instant's joyous little cascade into a continuous pageant. I can see there is so much more that I need to learn about myself. Just now, neither the old answers nor the old questions seem true enough. I step out on the slippery rocks, as close as I can to the bubbly Sawkill River, to find a dry place to sit beside this very modest waterfall, to listen a while in the hope that she might share her strength and school me in the ways of the droplet, both mighty and fleeting.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I'm sorry I missed one of the edits on your name. Appreciate.
No problem. Sorry.
That's okay. So this poem was really interesting to me because it starts in a bar and there's anger and then it ends at a waterfall filled with hope. So in the interim, the protagonist is wrestling with their inner demons. Do you find natural environments create a catalyst for self-forgiveness?
I was thinking about this poem, and I think that in my poetry, the natural world and the qualities of the natural world and how it works and how amazing it is very important. And I often bring not just natural things, but science and physics and stuff into poems, because I think it speaks to the the greatness of what is outside us, and it's how fundamental this thing that we live in is, even if, even if we sometimes go to the bar. And I also think the bar part is about, trying to going to people and then running away from them, because you're angry and you don't want to be there. But in fact, the magic of the waterfall is all of the individual bits all going over the edge at the same time and going, look at me, and then they're gone. And then it's the next people going, look at me. And so there's kind of in my protagonist, the poem gets a little perspective on his troubles, but also in the context of everyone else's, experience, that it's not all waterfall. It's a lot of just black water.
Thank you. And I also want to point out, I think that's one of your photographs behind you. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is The Universe Calling, and it's for the next, it's for one of the later poems.
For your poems. Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Sydney Regelbrugge is the 2022 Poet Laureate from Mendocino County. She grew up in Point Arena and attends Point Arena High School. Sydney won a scholarship to the Mendocino Writers Conference in 2021 for her prose, and won first place in recitation at the Point Arena High School Poetry Out Loud. Sydney's first poem is Crystal Ball. Unmute, Sydney.
Trying very hard. I've been on Zoom for 2 days. I had another panel yesterday, so my brain is a little zoomed out. I'm so happy to be here and be attending this, especially in the spotlight way. So this is Crystal Ball. Crystal Ball. My entire life is a collection of things people have left me with. Throw the salt over your left shoulder, like the spilled sea salt from the ocean my grandmother touched but never entered, held back by the fear of my papa. As I look down at my fingers, scrapes, lines, and cuts etched in, I'm holding my father's hand. Tell me again how you got this scar from broken glass. My entire life is almost as if a hand, scarred and worn and calloused, as if a palm reader could memorize every etch, like the writing into the 5 diaries I have never completed. An adopted y'all from my California country, where my grandfather's born in Illinois, yellow Texas roses he wore. As we buy a new pair of boots yearly, though I am so scared of the possibility and the inevitability of a not next year, eventually. Next year, I say the one with the woman slinging her Annie up boys, put another chip in, up the bet. My poker face adapted so clearly. A Jewish Catholic gambler with a Hebrew tongue slinging Southern phrases. I am a paradox in itself. Yet I live on this edge so contently. My dark eyes holding the tales of generations. Sydney Michelle Regelbrugge, a slung abroad Hebrew tongue in a Southern way kind of name. For each letter in it, I hold countless stories, deep down into the irises of my deep brown eyes and the etches of my hand. Do you wish to read my fortune?
Thank you, Sydney. That's lovely. So I'm going to repeat one of these lines because I just fell in love with it. A Jewish Catholic gambler with a Hebrew tongue slinging Southern phrases. It's just a wow moment in that poem. And it's this truly American combination of heritages. Do you think Americans with mixed heritage have a unique insight into history?
I think that any American is someone with mixed heritage, unless you're a Native American, because we all kind of come from different histories and backgrounds. I think the cultures and religions that you're brought up in can shape your experience, but overall probably don't define you. I know for me, a big thing with religion, two very contrasting religions, it has certainly given me an insight into my life and helped me shape it, but not has not defined it.
Thanks, Sydney. So next, Elizabeth is coming back. So we're circling back to Elizabeth. And her second poem is As If the World Were Made of Nothing But Hunger.
As if the world were made of nothing but hunger. On the sculpture Poem of 9 Verses by Salua Rauda Shuker. At least 2.5 million Ukrainians have fled their country in what the United Nations has called the fastest growing refugee crisis since World War II, from the New York Times. Before the river had edges, we had light at our edges. We will start with ravens that soar and drop into dark rivers. We will start with music through curtains. It's hard to recognize the music of these last days of life before you count and count the reams of empty space, rubble and crush. Death echoes like a junked tanker, like a cry the size of a single boy, overwhelmed by the stones, the color of bad teeth, the color of release, as old as ambush, as young as mud. We can be made to kneel, our knees folding into knees, fold into a river of endless bodies. Currents curl, constrict and drop, a coiled bridge between earth and sky. The veil thin between our dying world and that unknown chamber, this daylight chamber, balancing in a shaft of light, a socket not quite empty, one eye illuminated, one eclipsed.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So this poem is very much like that sculpture, and I encourage everybody to look it up. It's the Poem of 9 Verses, 1966 to 8. And it's actually not a poem, but a sculpture. And I recommend you just Google it and get a picture of it, because this poem very much fits the sculpture. The verses move from music to rubble to stones to color to bridge, between to daylight to shaft of light to eclipse, and back to the top where we heard light at our edges. The stanzas are independent, but they build and depend on the prior verse. How did the sculpture Poem of 9 Verses influence this piece?
This was a lot of fun to write because the sculpture itself was a series of 9 different stones that had been carved so that there was space and light between, but they touched each one in a different way. So there was a different light coming through and a different touch that each one had for the other. And I decided to write this into 9. I made 9 stanzas with 4 lines per stanza, so that it stacked one upon the other. And I stacked the words going from line to line where they touched. For example, edges touches edges in the second line, and the second each line touches the next with a word, so that it produced that same stacking feeling that the sculpture had. Each of these pieces of stone had an individual shape. No two were alike, and I couldn't, but yet they touched. And I worked hard. I thought at the time, this was when the Ukraine war began, and I knew I had to write something about the Ukraine. And so that's what prompted me to write this was feeling the agony that the Ukraine was feeling, touching each other and holding each other. So I knew I had to write this.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate the explanation. So Nadi is up again. Nadi, you're still muted. There you go. His second poem is How Do I Find Myself in the Sea of Stars?
How do I find myself in this sea of stars? How something gets inside you, how you get inside something. This Klein bottle universe has ample space-time. One life cannot fill it. 10 trillion lives are barely noticed. The weight of tomorrow, impossible to measure. I dream of being a dream, a portal to grander imaginings. So much made of matter matters so little. Against the loose dimensions of time. A simple walk through the woods takes billions of years for the first step. We'll leave at dawn. I remember the thought I had before I even knew to call it thought. The words that threw themselves like spears, penetrating my outer Planck layers. How I was compressed by gravity and biology, released as a revision to formlessness. I took those first steps inside another, leaping into multiformalism. Later, someone told me it was called life. I retain many doubts about that. Even standing at the window to see the stars, I believed I could fly among them if only I had the proper wings. How I flew in dreams, but never from mountains. There was no point of reference in this expanding cosmos. Where I stood with you is where I began. There is suspicion we have been fooled by our own design, unknown to ourselves. The world appears to be an oyster carried on the back of a turtle, of course.
Thank you, Maddie. So the Klein model, it's an interesting form. It's another thing I had to look up. I spent a lot of time Googling with all of your poetry. I learned so much. So this is a bottle that has no boundaries. It's not like human life at all. Did you include the oyster to ground us back to our own boundaries of beginnings and endings?
Well, I use oyster quite a bit as a rather kludgy metaphor, I think, in some ways, because it's it's got a lot of different meanings for a lot of people, but like among the Tlingit people in the Northwest, it's part of their creation myth, where all of life is contained in an oyster that is picked up from a beach by a raven who flies off with it, but it gets heavier and heavier as the raven flies until it can't hold it anymore. It falls to the beach, breaks open, and all of creation spills out. Of course, they never explain how raven and the beach and the oyster got there first, but that's your typical creation myth. But for me, it's also about that way that life pours a lot of sand on your gears, and you have a choice to come to a halt or to build more of a pearl around it. And so for me, that coming back to like this old myth carried on the back of a turtle, that's the obvious mythology there. Is how can we know about the stars when we barely know about ourselves? And I think it's mostly coming from that point of view here.
Thank you, Nadi. So our next poem is from Jonathan again. He just wrote this poem this past June, so it's fairly fresh. I'm not going to tell you what it's about until after, in case you don't know while you're listening to it. It's called The Quill, The Quillian, and The Quickening. Thank you, Jonathan. You're muted, Jonathan.
All right, sorry, I forgot. Okay. The quill, the quillion, and the quickening. Hungry sovereigns gorged beneath hard clay tablets, held high in proclaimed dominion, until divine right was shattered with a feather. Struck a moral blow, the fractured shards of distant popes and kings lay sharp and small. We made a common gravel of their claims and a fine dust of their decrees. This remnant dross we laid as foundation to level our halls and grout the cracks between our granite slabs of justice. This floor of compassion, laid in sublime revolt, now succumbs to liquefaction. The settled ground of truth turns to slurry. Arsonists, robed as patriots, put history and precedent to the torch, and then pitch Lady Liberty into the sea. And that was written at 1:30 a.m. at home in bed, 12 hours after the US Supreme Court stripped women of their constitutional rights of bodily autonomy. And I was pissed.
Okay, so you did that. So you told them. So my question to you is, it's a poem, it's a protest poem to the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. And it's a bold piece. I thought it was very bold. Are you planning to submit it, or have you submitted it for publication? And are you going to include the notes of origin in the submission if you do?
I think I have been including notes in my poems for a long time, but I got organized about it by putting a space for comments in the form that I use, the layout that I use when I write. And so they wind up being there kind of whether or not I'm thinking about it. I think in this one, I would vote for an asterisk, italicized, that line that I read at the end about when it was written, because I think it's, I didn't want to be explicit in the poem as much as but I didn't want the point to be missed. And I think in most places I've seen poetry published, they don't do that, but I would vote for it. I think what the other stuff that gets written by the poet, or that I write, is interesting, even when it's adjacent to the poem. I think it's kind of fun.
Thank you.
And I have a question about submission. I was thinking about this because this is a recording and it's a published recording, and what do you think about whether this counts as when the publication asks for an unpublished poem?
Sounds like Erica has the answer to that question, and she's going to be our speaker next month. So maybe we'll, if we have time, maybe we can get to that at the end of the program. But I want to make sure we get all the poems in. So
okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so Sydney's next poem is River Days. Sydney, you're muted.
So this is River Days. I don't love summer. Well, I love the bowls of oatmeal with fresh strawberries and old reruns of Seinfeld episodes. I love the river days when it's just too hot to work, fold down the soft top, the wind whipping my long, then undyed hair. I am so excited. The stop at Anchor Bay Market, pick out what you like. A candy bar, Sid? Sure, Dad. And Copenhagen lawn cut, but back then you were chewing the controversial Red Man. I'm so excited. No work for the day, cool water, feels like a shower to me. Those have been limited lately, not enough storage. I am so excited. The cars are all lined up. Truck after truck, music blasting out of the speakers. Oh, I go to school with them. No, Dad, don't drive so close. Don't park there. I want to go back home now. Okay, it's fine. Just don't look over there. I am suddenly so shameful of my old bikini, the cut-off jeans Dad made this morning. Tore the seams after drawing with Sharpie, my Tevas. I am suddenly so embarrassed of how stained my hands are, how naughty my hair is. Oh God, those are my friends. Go say hi. No thanks, Dad. Come on, don't be shy. No thanks, Dad. I think I'm gonna cry. They didn't invite me, but you never come. That's true. Okay, time to go. Heat of the day is done. Load up. Okay, wave goodbye. I don't want to wave. I don't want to stay. I want to turn my own skin inside out. I am so uncomfortable right now. 20 minutes till we get home. Put those ratty old jeans back on. Mom's working late tonight. That's fine. Chili dogs, okay. Tater tots too. Hey, drink some water. I'm so sorry. I was ashamed. Not of you or your calloused hands, your too loud music. I was so ashamed to show you. See, they came without me. Don't ask me what they're doing. Do you want to have some kids up? No, Dad. I did like it, just you and I, but I knew no one would say yes. I'm 16 now. God knows I sure as hell can't drive. Oh, check the locations. Everybody's together. You didn't think to invite me? That's okay. Bowl of oatmeal, please, Dad. Let's watch some Seinfeld.
Thank you, Sydney. River Days encapsulates social anxiety. Reading it brings up triggers even at my age, and I'm sure that other people in the audience had the same experience. Yet in the depth of the poem is the juxtaposition of water wealth, a cool river versus water poverty, not enough storage to take a shower. Have climate conditions become just a part of everyday reality now for you?
I live off grid, very, very off grid. And there was a time in my world where we could get by with 1,000 gallon of storage for water. But with climate change, that has gone away. And it's really, water being limited is really a hard thing, especially as a young girl. And you really have to get conscientious with the showers that you take. And I actually endeavored to create a natural pump when I was in 8th grade as an engineering project, and it's how we get our water now. But the fact that it's not just there, that the springs don't just flow as clearly as they have really many years ago, is a big part of my life. And it's definitely something that I'm always thinking of, even repurposing water, whether it's from bath water to water the orchard or the plants around. It's become something that's very adult to a teenage girl. So climate change has really affected my world. Yes.
Thank you, Sydney. So Elizabeth's next poem is a ghazal. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's an ancient Arabic form of poetry that can be set to music, and it's often about love and separation. Elizabeth, you're muted, so be sure and unmute.
Thank you. This is a guzzle for a brittle fall. Mountain streams play and lay on their backs, greedily eating leaves and October. Ravens in dark robes silently stalk the chalk faces and dried out tears of October. They return, these dazzling ghosts, with a rush of dark wings to prey on our bones in October. Small, tired stars, one by one, dive through the broken skies of October. Darkness smothers the woolly sun under the smoky blanket of October. Stunned and silent as the skin of the sea, only some sins float free in October. I am wide aloud, craving something like love, draped in the odd sparkle of October. A torch that has learned too much of fire burns what it loves in October. The moon that creases into the night shrouds Elizabeth's brittle light in October.
Oh, I like that.
Yes, that was lovely. And the other thing, that Ghazal requires you to put your name in the poem. So Elizabeth did that in that last stanza. So ravens appeared in each of the 3 poems that you've read today. So I'm wondering if you're working on a raven-inspired collection, or is this coincidence? And then the other question is, why did you select the Ghazal form for this poem?
Yes, I am writing a book on ravens. As a matter of fact, it's finished, and I'm in the process of sending it out. It's called Dark Tourist, and it's about ravens and the way it influences me. And I live here on Little Lake Road, and until I moved my compost bin, I was covered with ravens everywhere. And Molly, my dog, was chasing the ravens that never allowed her to catch them. But yes, I find them very intriguing. As far as the guzzle goes, I tend to write I write about things, and then I experiment in form, and I realized that this guzzle fit this what I was trying to say so well. I didn't want to put it into any other form. The form requires you to write the stanza in 2, each stanza has 2 lines. The final word of the second line has to be the same, but they have to be a complete thought. So each stanza is a complete thought. It can't go from one stanza to another. Has to, and so this intrigued me because I thought about October, which is a wonderful month, but it also carries a lot of mystery, like the raven. To me, the raven is a very mysterious bird. And I was glad that Nadi spoke about that particular myth about the ravens, which is the same myth, but it's a little different with the different tribes. So I know that myth, but not having dropped it into an oyster. It was, but it was, that's what, it was very inspiring to me to start writing about the raven, and I couldn't stop. So that's why you got the raven in some of these poems.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So Nadi has one more poem that he wants to read. It's called When This Broken Being Rises from the Dust. And this was written in 2015.
So not an effort to explain anything, but just to let you know, this is a very personal piece. I was born with several physical handicaps, and so I'm a natural born crip. And just so you get the reference. Here under the high canopy, pain only grows alongside doubtful flowers uncomfortable in their colors, or the singular moments of delight hiding beneath the deep loam where we grew soft in the morning like milkweed's autumn, later to firm and sharpen as the sun descends. What in the beginning I was has been tempered, thrown repeatedly against iron and bedrock, echoes back along those unexplored paths, dancing beyond the forests of my youth. Muscle and bone began under twisted memory, fell into the chasms of despair. To say I am misshapen To acknowledge cripple as a rational adjective, I must accept these cages as necessity. How the shadows of the trees conceal many small truths, build bridges across ages of impossible perfection. How you carried me until I would no longer resist, before the stumps began to sprout presumptive wings. In those turbulent eddies where we cautioned the tides, I could only be what I was, without a voice to ring against the paltry moon, travel the hero's journey without a net. I limp, I stumble, I lay flailing across the back of the world. The saddle unable to hold to the flesh, how the rescue never happens, or why they called from the far canyon's edge, their compassion without conviction, laughter echoing as far back as the Pleistocene. I stand at the bottom of gravity and the empty empyrean, hold what remains of myself as amber holds time. My heavy stick that sees in the night warns passing geese of my imminent arrival. It shapes my hand to its temper, taps out code to the underground. I am other, it says. It also says I will keep on. This road, as it turns into hills, where it leads endless and useful to a new body, awaiting its first step, its first moment of joy.
Thank you, Nadi. To me, this piece encapsulates the hope for a rebirth that hasn't happened yet. But it also touches on the help that we receive from others. Some of it is genuine and real, and some of it is self-serving and of a little help at all. I'm not talking about the poem, I'm talking about the help we receive from others. Is that something that you meant to say?
Well, I mean, of course, my mother is in here. How you carried me until I could no longer resist. And by that, I'm not simply speaking to my birth. I'm speaking to the many years that she had to schlep me 3 different buses every week to the clinics where I was cared for. And so it was quite a, quite a journey on her part as well. It's there is no resolution when you're born with something that's going to be with you your whole life. All there is trying to find ways to see it and understand it. That's pretty much all there is to it. And I think there was many a year, especially in my childhood, longing for a new body. And so it's just one of those things that you struggle throughout your life to try to find the gift of it, and instead of just the weight of it.
That's beautiful, Nadi. Thank you. So Jonathan has a very short poem, and he also has, it's from his book, which I have a copy of, 7 Dimensions of the Unseen. And it includes a photograph. The book has poetry that matches photograph, which you can see is behind Jonathan. So it's called Big White Face.
All right, big white face. When I set out to render visible the mystical and unseen structure of everything, I hadn't a moment's concern that I would instead reveal my own secrets for all to see and nothing else.
Thank you. Okay. So I have a question about, do you create the poem or the image first? Do you create one to match the other? Or are they written separately and then you bring them together? How do you match your poetry and your photography?
Well, for this particular project, I made these images, and there's a whole process behind them, which is in the book, but basically they were images that were projected on a screen, which were the result of a sort of a light sculpture, and then I photographed the screen. So they were very indirect. And then after they were on the wall, I wrote the poems. And what was important about this was during that project, before I actually got started on it, I realized that I had been titling my previous pictures by having a poetic journey with them and going, oh, here's the title to that poem. And then I went, wait a minute, I should be writing down the poem, not just the title of the poem. And that's how that whole 7 Dimensions project unfurled. And all of the poems were written after the pictures were up on the wall. So they were very deliberately written. And it turned out that the titles were simpler than I usually made, because the poems carried the weight that the titles used to have to carry.
Thank you. That's good. Yeah. So Sydney has a third poem. I haven't heard it yet. She just wrote it, and she's, I guess, working on it this week, and she didn't want to send it early. Or, I don't know, did you just finish it, Sydney?
I had just finished it yesterday. Yeah.
No, this is fresh. Go ahead.
Kind of a poem I started on Mother's Day for my mom, because that tends to be my thing for all of my family members' birthdays. I write them big, long poems. And well, it has some relevance to the moment. This is called Time. I have the time, right? I can fast forward past this part, looked at the previews of the upcoming years. I'll just rewind the gray from your temples, reverse the puberty I was blessed with, because I have time. Time to spend 2.5-hour car rides gossiping. Time to watch the same movie over and over again. Because when Sandy slams the door on Danny, I'm 5 again. In that loft, a home that wasn't even ours. But with time, it became one. Can I please hit pause? Just stop this film, let the cameras cool. Slowly set the clock back to popcorn and TV dinners, to Star Wars, sorry, in that little bathroom. Just for a moment, let's watch Grease, okay? I have time, right? I have time. Thank you very much.
That's lovely, Sydney. And since I didn't read it ahead of time, I'm not going to try to come up with a question out of the blue, because that's just, I'm sure it'll be totally off base without thinking about it. So I'm just going to move forward. So Elizabeth's final reading is Happy Birthday. Elizabeth, you're muted.
I feel it's a good segue. I appreciated you writing about your mother and the birth, your birth. This Happy Birthday was a lot of fun for me to write. And I'm glad that to be able to inject a little humor into my writing. Happy birthday. This is your day. And if that ain't a fact, God's a possum. Today, joy will hook you on a star. So I wish you a day sweeter than stolen honey, fine as frog fur, all wool and a yard wide. I hope you're cooking on a front burner today, that you're hot as a pot of neck bones, hotter than a whoopee in woolens. For the years will go by faster than a sneeze through a screen door. The years go by in 1/2 less than no time, for they're a whisper in a whirlwind. So have a day as fine as dollar cotton, fine as boomtown silk, fine as peanut butter brownies. Know it will be like a hog to persimmons. You can hang your hat on it.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I just wondered, was this a vernacular challenge, like, write a poem in vernacular?
No, I wanted to find a way, an unusual way to say happy birthday to someone, and I thought, we often will say little vernacular things like my father always used to say, um, oh my goodness, it a rag on a you can it's like a rag on the cotton, on the row of cotton. You tie a rag on the row of cotton. Gee, I thought I had that saying, that I had it memorized all my life, but I don't. But someone will say, you know, this is as good as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. And I said, you know, those are wonderful sayings. So I looked them up. I looked up I Googled Southern sayings, and you would not believe there were pages and pages of them. And so I had a great time writing them and picking out the ones that I loved. And it turned out that it made a great happy birthday poem. Well, it's a lot of fun to do, because it was my sense of humor.
So this is the last poem. Jonathan has one more short poem. It's called The Universe Calling. And I think you've noticed he's changed the photo in his background.
Yeah, but there's the whole thing. Okay, I'm going back. The universe calling. I have learned that it does not matter who I think it is when the universe is speaking to me, as long as I listen. And that little voice in my head, well, that is not the universe. That is the voice I've had to shush all my life to hear anything at all.
So thank you, Jonathan. So that's the end of our readings, and I know it's 4 o'clock, and that's when the meeting typically ends, but we do have some other questions for the panel. So if you guys can bear with, I'm just going to throw these questions out, and then with whoever on the panel wants to answer, if you could just raise your hand. I assume you all know how to do that, and we'll go from there. So we're going to talk about publishing and submittals. What is your submittal process, and how do you select a publisher to submit to? Anybody care to answer that? Elizabeth?
I often read I try to read the poetry of the journals that I submit to. There are lots of different levels of journals. There are the A levels, which are very difficult to get into, and then there's the B levels, etc. But I want to make sure that I send my poems to a journal that I'm proud of, because once I did send a poem in, and they were very proud about their journal, which cost a lot of money, and so they sent me a copy, and it was the worst poetry you have ever read, and I was in it, and so I decided I'd make sure I read every journal I ever submitted to.
Anybody else want to answer that question, Nadi?
Yeah, well, that was brilliant. Yeah, I do basically the same thing. I'll search around for various journals I've never heard of. I'll get a copy. I'll read through some stuff. I mean, some fortunately will have some of the work online, and so I don't have to buy the journal. I just read it. But I've also learned that you have to sometimes send stuff to the so-called A-list.
Where's he going?
Because if you don't, then you're never gonna try. You're never gonna get there. You're gonna get a lot of rejections. I mean, I've had years where I've had nothing accepted, and I've had my best year ever was 11 pieces.
Wow.
So, it's just it kind of wears you out. I think over time. So there have been years where I've not submitted a damn thing because I'm just sick of the process, But yeah, that's the scientific approach, I guess.
Okay. Has anybody hit their target first time that they sent something, they got it published?
No.
I actually did. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
But I wrote this poem. Actually, it was the second poem that I read, and it was actually solicited. So somebody wrote me, the Insurrectionist Journal wrote and said, we'd like to publish it. It's the first time they had ever solicited a poem. I think they wanted to publish something about Ukraine, and that's why it got in.
And
But-
Sydney, did you have an answer for that?
Yeah, didn't mean to interrupt, Sydney.
Oh, that's all right, Elizabeth.
I did not know, no, ma'am.
I thought I saw you raise your hand. Okay. If one of your pieces is rejected, do you go back and refine it before resubmitting it elsewhere? Anybody?
Well, I can say this. Very few people will give you any feedback at all. And so I don't know why it was rejected. Thank you very much. We hope to see more of your work. This just didn't fit now. It's like, what is that? I mean, it's absurd. So I don't tend to rework a piece because it was rejected until somebody maybe gives me some input. My writers group is good for that. So I have a lot of time to do revision and that sort of thing. But no, if I tried to revise based on what passes for a response, I wouldn't even know where to begin. No.
Okay. Elizabeth, go ahead.
As a singer, I auditioned a lot and would get up and sing an aria, and then they would say, "Thank you, next." That's all you would get. So the rejection as a poet is really much easier to take than "thank you, next" to your face. But what I did as a singer was, if I was rejected, I'd go out and learn a new aria. And so the next time I'd audition with a different aria, and I kept learning all these arias. And I found that as a poet, I am committed to what I have to say. I refine what I write a lot. So I don't refine it unless it's something from 5 or 6 years ago, which I read and I go, oh my God, I sent this in. So I do change it. But you don't know the reasons that people reject. Just like Nadi said, no one tells you that they were already full, or they had a theme that they were following, or there was only one spot and there were 300 poets that wrote for the one spot. You just don't know. So to refine or rewrite anything is kind of a waste of time, unless it's really bad.
So are you guys surprised at how people interpret your poetry, including me with my crazy questions today?
I always find it really interesting with the age difference that you get when people interpret my poetry, because they will pick up on the exact same things, and then like a teenager will relate to a certain part of it, and someone who's like well into their life relates to a totally different part. But I have had people who I'm not very close with completely connect to like a very set scene in a way that I had like never thought of. So it's very interesting if you don't know the person, especially for them to pick out like a certain verse and just be like, I relate to this entirely, because I don't ever really have that connection.
I think we're going to have to end, but but we'll stay. So people who want to, but I want to give people permission to leave. So this will be part of our ending like half-hour discussion. So, but thank you all. It was wonderful. It was very enlightening and very helpful to listen to. Thank you. And thank you, Michelle.
Thank you all the poets.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Jonathan. Great.
You're welcome.
Did anybody else want to answer that question about interpreting your poetry?
May I say something? I was so impressed with your poetry, Sydney, that it was, what can I say? From the viewpoint of your age. Now, I'm a lot older than you are, but I really appreciated the viewpoint that you had in your poetry. It was just beautiful, fresh and young. It was lovely, just lovely.
Thank you so much.
I think I think when people are reading your poetry or listening to it, and I think it's great when somebody hears it and hears it at a different level than you, or from a different
Mhm.
angle than you had originally focused on. And it's a good lesson to me as a writer to go, oh, you know, assume I don't understand this, how do I hear it if I haven't read it 50 times? Um, uh, what are the levels that I'm looking at the poem at, and have I looked at all the levels that I could look at? And I'm getting better at that. But I think it's great. It's really useful.
I am fortunate in that I knew Larry Ferlinghetti just a little bit, and met with him a number of times, attended several readings of his. And I got the opportunity to ask him that very question: how do you feel about how people interpret your poetry? And he says, I could give a fuck. Which is that's he's so erudite. But for me, it's like I kind of look at poetry as a personal language. And I think every poet forms their own syntax, their own vocabulary, all these different elements of language in there, but also the language of the things that the words haven't been invented yet. That's why sometimes we'll, try to unwind a thought in a very convoluted way, because we're trying to get at that thing that sort of avoids language, and we're trying to bring it into language. And if someone does give me a response to my poem, I pay very close attention to that. I don't necessarily change anything because of it, but I pay close attention to it because there's something else floating around in the language that I was unaware of. And I want to add that to my vocabulary. I want to fill out my language. And so even if I disagree with their take on it, the fact that something seeped out like that it ended up in a different way in another person's mind, really informs me of where, I really need to get broader in this area or narrow the focus here or something. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to change the piece. It just tells me, add this to the collection.
Right. So do any of you have a favorite location that you write in, or an atmosphere for that matter?
Oh, I have a favorite place. My bed. I sit in my bed. Oh, any of my visitors who come and stay with me know not to bother me until they hear something coming from my bedroom, because I'm sitting there with my computer and my little notepad. Yeah.
Jonathan?
The kitchen, the coffee shop, and the park bench.
All right. All right. Okay, and then this is the last question. Do any of you write by hand?
I actually did these terrible creative bursts right in the worst parts. I had one the other night at dinner. My mom was in the middle of asking me a question. I got up and ran to my room and grabbed the 3x5 card. And my dad was like, so are you enjoying dinner, baby? And I was like, I can't talk to you right now. Literally, I'm sorry. I just cannot have this conversation right now. So I write the majority of my poetry before it's edited by hand. So yes.
Anybody else? Nadi?
Well, to go to the previous question, I just generally write at my computer most of the time now. But I do also write by hand. And usually it's when I can't sleep, it's 3 a.m, and a line has woken me up. And I've learned from great experience at this point that if I don't get it down, it's gone. It will never come back. It has no purpose to exist after that moment. So, it's like right now, wake up, get it down.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you, all of you, and thank you for staying, those who stayed late, and I appreciate that. I know it was supposed to be, I guess, an hour, and we've gone over about 15 minutes, so But we got to hear a lot of great poetry. So thank you everyone for
Thank you.